So when it comes to our thought, you want to raise your awareness. And I love the sign that behind you that says awareness is everything. So S, you're going to notice the sound. You're going to spot it. That's the S for shift. You're going to spot that critical thought. Okay. H, you're then going to hear it. That's the second step. You want to hear whose voice it is. Is it your voice or is it somebody else's voice? I, this is the third step. You want to investigate.
Awekenge, this is Mental Matters, hosted by Asego Toto.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Mental Matters. I'm your host, Asego Toto. And before we dive into today's incredible conversation, I have a small favor to ask. If you enjoy what you hear today, please take a moment to rate and review our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also helps others discover the valuable insights we share every week. And if you find today's episode particularly inspiring or insightful, don't forget to share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think could benefit from it. Thank you for your support. It truly means the world to us. Now, let's get back into our conversation.
Why did you become a speech language pathologist and a communication and body language expert? What actually drew you?
Why did I become a speech language pathologist? When I first started out in undergraduate, I actually started out in nursing. And nursing, even though I liked the sciences, it just quite wasn't the fit for me. And I started to lean towards speech language communication because the initial class that I took was in sign language. And I had always loved talking and engaging with other people. And I hadn't pieced it together until I started to dive more into the field of speech language pathology, especially when it comes to communication sciences and really understanding when you get to look in the rearview mirror, oh, that makes so much more sense when you look behind you, especially because I had worked with a variety of children when I was younger as a babysitter, and they had special needs and they weren't able to effectively communicate as you and I would. We normally speak in sentences, and the little ones that I was working with didn't have language skills. So when I looked in the rearview mirror of my life, I thought, oh, okay, I was always being guided this way.
Mm-hmm. And going back to what you've said, actually, in terms of working with special needs children, and it's quite a conversation that myself and have been into. I feel like a year and 6 months now, and being able to be working in a department that will actually advocate for people students that have disabilities, and able to actually empower them in terms of acknowledging their disability and actually disclosing it. It's quite something that it's a job that is quite tough, and people are, I would say, that are not ready to actually accept the fact that, okay, this is disability. And there are some people that are still ignorant around that. I thought that I should actually say that. And how have you, in terms of, have you seen that? How have you seen mental health and speech language interlink within your expertise?
For me, very specifically, when it comes to mental health and speech and language communication, what I help people do is also focus in on their internal communication. The voices in our head, they're constantly talking to us. And it's important to really raise your awareness of, are these voices supporting us or are they not supporting us? And how we communicate with ourselves is how we communicate with the rest of the world. So if you're noticing in your outward language, if you're saying, oh, well, the problem with that is, or this is the problem, here's the problem, you tend to be more internally problem oriented. You're constantly looking for a problem. In that case, you can actually start to reframe it and think, okay, well, a great solution here would be, or a potential solution here, or here's how we navigate around that, and here's a great thing to do. You then become more solution oriented. So when we're communicating, it's really important to raise your level of awareness of how you're communicating with yourself, as well as how you're communicating outwardly with your team or with your family. When it comes to communication, it is the foundation of our lives. We're constantly communicating with each other, whether it's having a back and forth conversation with our words. But keep in mind, there's a statistic out there, and it goes something along the lines of 70+% of what we say is nonverbal, which means we're communicating with our facial expression. We're communicating with our body language. We're communicating with our eye contact. We're communicating with the tone of our voice. So as you raise your awareness of the communication inside your head, do you notice if you're more harsh to yourself? What's the voices in your head saying? Are they very critical? Are they very judgmental? What's the tone? As you raise your level of awareness of that, you'll also start to notice outwardly. If you tend to have a harsher disposition and you're more intense in your conversations, you're likely more intense in your head. So it's something that you really get to start to play with. And when you want to improve your mentality, your mental wellness, your mental focus, the things to truly notice are, the first and foremost, what's the sound? How are you communicating? What's the tone of voice? Is it soft? Is it gentle? Is it stern? Is it angry? Then notice your language. What kind of words are you using? And what are those definitions equal to you?
It's something that you just said, that in terms of communicating with ourselves, it's quite a very fascinating debate, because one thing that I'm quite sure that with the guests that I have had on this podcast that have dealt with mental health problems is the fact that sometimes it's quite difficult to actually be positive. It's quite difficult to actually change the perspective of how I see things in a way, because sometimes it's either when we have problems with mental health, it's either we run to addiction, or we run to having those suicidal ideations. And actually, we don't have that thing of talking with ourselves and being able to recognize that this talk that I'm talking with myself, it's rude. It's a sound that I wouldn't actually say. I wouldn't talk this way to another person. So, as someone that is an expert in the field, what is the main reason of us actually being rude towards ourselves? But most of the time, I'm quite sure, also myself, I have been nice to myself. When I talk towards myself, I come in a way of being rude towards myself. So what is the reason behind of us of talking back to ourselves?
I love your honesty and your vulnerability, especially when it comes to the voices in your head. And you raised a beautiful point. We can be very kind outwardly, and things that we might say to ourselves, we might never say to other people because we know that that's rude. The voices in our head often come from the environment that we grew up in. Now, keeping in mind the environment is the people that we lived with, but also the people that we observed, our culture, our music, our movies. What else is going on in that environment? Because when we think about language develops over time. We are born with the ability to understand language. That being said, there has to be language input for it to make sense. When we're babies, we don't know the difference between a spoon or a fork. We are taught that. When it comes to the language of how and the tone of how we can be talking to ourselves, sometimes it can really be ourselves talking to ourselves that way, but it can also be another person's voice talking to us in that harsh, critical way. And this is especially when you mentioned about suicidal ideation and other things, especially when you have this very strong inner critic and you're saying things to yourself that you would never in a million years say to somebody that you loved or even your worst enemy. It's important to raise your awareness and start to notice This was very pivotal for me. And as a speech language pathologist, I am a detective of language and I really focus in on it. When you have a thought, you do not have to believe every thought you think. You have the ability to decide, is this a helpful thought? Is this a not so helpful thought? And if so, how do I start to shift it? One thing that I love to teach my clients, my students, and families is what I affectionately refer to as the shift protocol. Now, when we're talking about the shift protocol, it's right here on our hand. So SHIFT. It's a 5-letter word and we have 5 fingers. So when it comes to our thought, you want to raise your awareness. And I love the sign that behind you that says awareness is everything. So S, you're going to notice the sound. You're going to spot it. That's the S for shift. You're going to spot that critical thought. Okay. H, you're then going to hear it. That's the second step. You want to hear whose voice it is. Is it your voice or is it somebody else's voice? I, this is the third step. You want to investigate it. Is this thought helping you? Is it supporting you in any way? Or is it not helping you? And we have F. F stands for frame it. What you want to do is become the detective of, has this thought always been true? Or do I have some evidence that can contradict this? So you want to frame it, notice the thought and frame it and find that evidence of the fact that this is not a true thought. T, the last letter, trade it in for a different thought. So if you're thinking, I'm not good enough to lead this project, you're going to spot the thought. I'm not good enough to lead this project. H, you're going to hear it. Whose voice is it? Is it my voice? Is it somebody else's voice? I'm not good enough to lead this project. We're going to investigate it. Is this a helpful thought or is this a not so helpful thought? We're going to go with a not so helpful thought. F, we're going to frame it. I'm not good enough to lead this project. Well, is that always true? Or has that ever been not true? And think of evidence when it's not been true. There are plenty of things that you've led. You've managed to lead yourself this entire time throughout your entire life. You've learned from other people. You've carried forward. So this can't possibly be a true thought. This thought of, I'm not good enough to lead this project. T, we're going to trade it in for a new thought. I am good enough to lead this project because I have done X, Y, and Z throughout my life. I am capable of leading this project because I am a good leader. I look for solutions. I help other people. That's how we start to really become the detective of our language and shift those limiting thoughts, to shift those thoughts that are holding us back and keeping us stuck.
And something that actually just came on my mind when you basically said this, when it comes to in this limiting beliefs. Sometimes we come to a point in our lives that we have dealt with such a trauma that we no longer know what is a good voice or a bad voice, and not actually distinguish between those two. As much as you entail the shift, the autonomy, you actually place it in a perfect way. For someone that has not actually, that has also, let me rephrase my question. The reason why I actually asking this question, because I've seen something that I believe that not only within myself, but also other people, that I've seen people being in relationships and they see the fact that this person is very bad for them, but they still go towards them. And usually I would say that I linked it with trauma, being able to not actually to yearn for love, or not able to know what is right for you. So in terms of that, a person, how do you actually do you use the same abbreviation to someone that has that mentality of nothing good will happen to me, or they actually can't even distinguish what is good or bad? What are the bad thoughts? What are the good thoughts?
So what are the bad thoughts and what are the good thoughts? That's a great question. I love thinking of them as, are they helping or are they not as helpful as they could be? Now, especially when it comes to relationships. So as a speech language pathologist and with the clients that I have with the company that I work with called Better Speech,